something. Whether it be heights, clowns, or death itself, it doesn't matter. There is something that many people are commonly scared of. That possibility that someone is outside. Someone knows you are home alone late at night. When I was 12, something happened to me when I was home alone. People have asked me what happened many times in my life, and I don't like talking about it in person. But right now, I feel that I need to. Maybe telling a bunch of strangers what happened will help, because therapy is doing nothing. It happened a week or two before Thanksgiving. My parents had gone out to dinner, and then were going to go see a movie afterwards. They estimated that they would be home around midnight. No problem for me. I had been home alone many times, and honestly, I enjoyed the freedom to do whatever I wanted for a few hours. The only thing that was different about this night is that because they were going out to dinner, they didn't make dinner for me before they left. Instead, they ordered me a pizza. I was watching a movie in the living room, and my parents were sitting in the dining room waiting for the pizza to be delivered so that they could leave. Well, the pizza was taking much longer than they expected, and told me to just tip the person $5 when they got there. I found out later that they had reservations to the restaurant, and that's why they had to leave before the pizza guy got there. After they left, about another 30 minutes passed before the pizza guy got to my house. I opened the front door, and a shaky-looking guy that looked like he was on cocaine was standing there, with no pizza. I stood there looking at him bewildered and awkwardly, and then finally asked, "Where's the pizza?" The guy smiled and laughed and said, I left it in the car. I'll go get it, but first, can I come in to use your bathroom?" This was so unexpected. I hate confrontation, so I said yes. I watched the guy walk down the hallway and enter the bathroom. He closed the door. I didn't hear anything, so I sat down on the couch. I couldn't have been sitting for more than a minute. I got up and turned around, and the bathroom door was now open. Expecting to see the guy walk out at any second, I started walking towards it. But my heart sank when I realized he wasn't in the bathroom. I didn't know what to make of this, and for a moment, my mind chose to assume that he had somehow silently went out the front door to go get the pizza. I walked over to the front door and looked out the screen. I did see a car parked out front, but I couldn't see the guy. My imagination started racing with possibilities, and terror set in as I came to the realization that he might still be inside my house. I turned around and went into the kitchen. Nothing. The dining room. Nothing. I yelled out, "Hey, are you in here?" Of course, I didn't expect a response, but I got one. Without hesitation, the guy responded, "Yes." For a moment, I didn't know what to do next, so I stood there, my mind frantically trying to make sense of this messed up situation that I would normally see on TV or in a movie. I decided to briskly exit the house. I walked out the still open front door and towards the guy's car. I circled around the back of the car, and when I got to the driver's side door, I saw the most disturbing sight of my life. A person sitting in the front seat, hunched over the steering wheel, blood smeared all over the window. I looked up and saw the guy standing in the window upstairs, looking down at me. After seeing the guy hunched over in the car, the blood, and then the guy standing in the window upstairs, I ran. I ran until I saw someone. Anyone. There was a woman getting out of her car at some random house, and I actually scared her when I approached. My frantic state must have made me look dangerous. I told her what was happening at my house and asked her to call the cops. She did, and then went inside and asked me to wait outside on the porch. I was so scared, I half expected to see the guy bolt around the corner out of the darkness and find me. All was quiet until 2 cops showed up. They brought me back to my house and called my parents. I didn't go back in until my parents got back, and even then, I thought somehow the cops just didn't find the guy, and he was still hiding somewhere in my house. More cops showed up along with an ambulance. After all these years, we still don't know what exactly happened. Our best guess is some random psycho was walking by right when the pizza guy showed up and stabbed him in the chest. I have no idea why he decided to come into my house or what he planned to do after he got in. He was never caught, and I never saw him again. The thing about all of this that I remember the clearest is the way blood looks smeared on glass. It's a lot darker than what you see in the movies. This happened to my mother before I was born over 20 years ago. She worked at a local bar. The bar mainly catered for fishermen. She knew most of the people who would come in for drinks. However, every now and again people from town would come in. She told me that one guy used to come in who she had known from house parties around the place and always wanted to talk to her while she was working. She would say sorry and keep doing her thing. One night she finished work around midnight and was walking home, which was fairly close by. When she got home from her shift, she decided to take a shower. After her shower, making her way back to her room, she realized her bedroom door was open, which she normally kept shut. She blew it off as nothing. She laid down in bed to go to sleep. But something didn't feel right, and for reasons she can't explain, she felt the need to look under her bed. What she saw under the bed was the guy from the bar. He had followed her all the way from work. She tells me that she just stared at him for the longest time, and he didn't move, not even breathe, to the point that she thought he was dead. She calmly went out of the room and called the police. They showed up soon after, and when they went into her room, he was gone, and the window was wide open. I live alone in the mountains of Northern California. I don't get many visitors. So I was very surprised one night when I was lying in bed, and I thought I heard knocking on my front door. I opened the door, and there was no one there. I assumed then that it was just something else. It could be a number of things. The forest surrounds my property. It could be a number of different animals. I went back to bed, but not long after I laid down, I awoke to a continuous knocking sound. It sounded like it was coming from my kitchen, and not the front door like before. My house is in the middle of nowhere. The noise was so blatant, and it was getting louder as I approached my kitchen. My house is so far in the middle of nowhere. There is no way that someone could be out there. I turned on the kitchen light. What I immediately saw was horrifying. An arm reaching up from under the window outside, knocking on the window. I was frozen with fear. I turned off the light and went back to my room. Back to my room to get my gun. Once I had it loaded, I went back into the kitchen, but the arm was no longer reaching up, knocking. I sat at the kitchen table and waited. A few minutes went by, and suddenly, but slowly, a man's face slowly rose from under the window and was looking inside at me. He smiled and looked like a deranged psycho. I pointed my Glock at him, and he disappeared. I heard branches crunching outside and the sound of laughter fade, as I assume he ran away. I have lived in this house for 5.5 years, and nothing similar to this has ever happened before. I have no idea who this man was, but to say it was scary is laughable. It's an understatement. This insane-looking man had to walk incredibly far to get to my house. And for what reason? I have no idea. I don't want to know. My dad was out for a job interview, so my sister and I were home alone for about 2 hours. I watched TV downstairs and went outside, and when I went back in, I left the door unlocked for my dad, since it was getting close to the time he said that he would be home. I went upstairs and hung out with my sister for a while. I heard the front door open at one point, and then I could hear somebody moving around downstairs. I just assumed that it was my dad. I then heard my dad's bedroom door open and close, albeit very slowly, and it happened a few times. I was talking with my sister when the phone rang. To my surprise, it was my dad on the other end. He told me that he was going to be getting home late and that we needed to make our own dinner. It felt like my heart fell to my feet as he said that. I realized that it wasn't my dad that had entered the house. I hurriedly rushed downstairs to see if anyone was there. Several things were gone, and the front door was wide open. I then heard what sounded like breathing coming from the downstairs bathroom. I choked the urge to yell as I saw a hand wrap around the door and then a face look around the corner. As soon as the guy saw me, he smiled and then walked out of the bathroom and out the front door. I looked out the window but couldn't see him. On the floor in the bathroom, I found a box cutter. I'm not sure what his intentions were with this weapon, but I'm really glad he didn't use it. This happened 4 years ago. I was 16. My mom died when I was 2 years old, so it was just my dad and I. We lived in an old house that my grandparents owned, and it was falling apart. I never felt safe in this house, even when my dad was home. I always had this gut feeling that someone would eventually break in. I don't know why, and I just hoped that I wouldn't be home when they did. It was a Friday night, and my dad had to work late. I was working on a paper that was due the following Monday, and I wanted to bust it out and have the rest of the weekend to chill and do whatever I want. I was sitting at my desk in the computer room next to the kitchen. There were 2 main doors to this house, the front door and the back door in the kitchen that leads to the backyard. We had no surrounding fence at all. I was typing away, making some good progress, when the phone rang. This was in 2001, and I didn't have a cell phone at the time. My dad did, but the phone I used was the landline. I picked up the phone, and this telemarketer starts going on about selling us a new roof. He literally would not stop talking for a full 3 minutes so that I could say no thanks and just hang up. When he finally took a breath, I said, "No thank you, we rent," and hung up the phone. About 20 minutes passed, I would say, and I was halfway done with my paper. The phone rang again. I picked it up, and after I said hello, I heard nothing. Nothing except breathing. I repeated, "Hello?" And the telemarketer that had called before suddenly spoke. He apologized and said that he must have redialed my house by mistake. I thought it was slightly weird, but told him no problem and hung up again. Not 10 seconds later, the phone rang again. At this point, I had a feeling that something was wrong, and I became very aware that I was home alone. I picked up the phone and in an agitated voice said, "Yes?" I could hear the breathing again. It sounded as if he wanted me to hear him breathing. I then said, "We are not interested and we don't own this house. Please stop calling." I hung up. I got up and walked into the kitchen and got a soda from the fridge. I glanced around and felt really nervous. I watched a lot of scary movies during those times, and this night I felt like I was in one. I felt like I was being watched. I was too distracted to continue my paper, so I went into the living room and turned on the TV. After about an hour, I had gotten over the creepy calls and was starting to fall asleep. The phone rang. It jolted me awake, and I just let it ring, until I thought that it could be my dad, so I ran into the office and picked it up. Before I could say hello, the telemarketer from before said, "You have a nice house." This, as you can imagine, was the most terrifying thing I had ever heard. Before I could think of what to say back, the back door to the kitchen opened and then slammed. I hung up the phone and immediately called my dad. It rang and rang, and then he answered. But I realized something when he did. It wasn't him. It was not my dad that said hello. It was him. The guy. The telemarketer. I don't know what I was thinking after that. I remember I hung up the phone and ran into my dad's room. It had a lock. No other room had a lock. The phone rang probably 30 more times while I sat in there and waited. I heard noises all throughout the house, but I can't say for sure what they were. My dad finally got home. It was really late. He told me that his cell phone disappeared off of his desk at work and was disturbed when I explained what had happened. Someone from his work had stolen his phone and had come to our house that night. We never found out who it was. My dad still works with that same company, and it still scares me to think that whoever did this could still be working with him, interacting with him every day.
To start off with, I'm a late 20s male around 6'4" and around 180 pounds. I'm sometimes too nice to my friends. I tend to do favors for them, even if they seem pretty ridiculous, as long as it's not too terribly out of my way. Most of the time, it's of the help I'm drunk and I need a ride home variety. One night, though, at around 1:30 a.m., I got the call. A very, very drunk friend of mine, Claire, begging me to come pick her up and give her a ride home very soon. The bar was closing and she was too wasted to drive herself. The bar she was at wasn't too far from my house, only about a 10 to 15 minute drive. The issue, though, is that she lived about 35 to 45 minutes on the opposite side of town. Claire, though, has been extremely nice to me in the past, and I did owe her a bunch of solids. So, at about 10 to 2, I grabbed my keys, my concealed carry as well, and left the house to go find her. I got to the bar at around 5 past 2. She was sitting outside on a bench by the doorman. I pulled into the parking lot, which was pretty empty now since the bar was closed. I assumed the cars remaining were from the workers who had yet to leave. I get out of the car and start walking over to Claire, who's kind of slumped over. I was hoping she wasn't passed out drunk. When I got to her, the doorman asked if I was her ride. I told him yes and showed my ID for proof. What he said next was of some serious concern, though. He pulled me aside kinda close and leaned in. I'll leave out where I interjected and just write what he said. "Hey, I was supposed to leave when we closed, but I got a strong feeling your friend was roofied. She was out on the porch all night and some guy just kept hovering around her. I assumed it was her boyfriend or something, but she never turned to talk to the guy. She was either drinking or chatting with the other girls around her. Well, anyway, when she chugged her last drink, she came up to me and told me you would be coming to pick her up. She asked if she could sit by me because she felt very dizzy and sick. After that, I couldn't see that guy anymore, but I don't want you to take any chances." Visibly concerned, I thanked the guy profusely. He even helped me carry Claire to my car. Midway through carrying her, she was kind of coming to, like someone just waking up after a surgery. That really groggy, not even knowing where they are, talking nonsense kind of stuff. I don't remember exactly what she was talking about, but I'm sure if I wasn't on high alert about her possibly being drugged, it would have been some funny shit. So we get her all buckled in. I thank the doorman once again. He just says he hopes she gets home safe. So now, hoping my friend is only stupid drunk and not drugged out of her mind, I start driving her to her house. The whole time I was trying to keep an eye on her and an eye on the road. She was now snoring deeply asleep, which sort of put me at ease. About halfway to her house, though, the fuel light comes on. Cursing the fuel economy of a sports car, I pulled into the next gas station. It was one of those small ones that doesn't have a 24-hour store attached. I was on extra high alert while I started pumping the gas. It was about a block from the freeway and right at the corner of the intersection. The street itself was very dark, with lonely lampposts shining very pitiful lights at large intervals. I get that really dead feeling from it, like this is a place that has just been abandoned. To give an idea of the positioning, the gas station was at the very corner of the intersection. The storefront would be facing south. We were right in front of it where the pumps were. The east would be where the air pumps for tires were and the parking spaces. And north would be a diesel fuel pump right behind the store, accessible from the street behind the gas station. I drive a Corvette, so the filler is on the rear end of the car. I'm just leaning there against the rear, looking around. To my left, I hear this weird metallic scraping sound. I turn and see this guy about 15 feet away from me, coming around the corner, dragging this metal pipe along the ground. I immediately sensed I was in a possibly dangerous situation now. The guy looked almost possessed, but he was not looking at me. Rather, he was trying to look into my car. I was on the defensive. I hoped I could just get him to back off and leave, so I called out to him. "Hey man, everything all right?" Without even looking at me though, he answers back immediately. "You took my girlfriend from me. I'm here to take her back." He turned to me. His eyes were completely bloodshot. Before he even began to take another step, I started yelling, hoping it would get him to back off. I'm a little bit over 6 feet tall, and I have a really deep voice too. "Back the fuck off! Turn around and leave right now, and no one has to get hurt." He took a step toward me, clearly unimpressed. Almost automatically, I pulled my gun from the inside waistband holster and drew a bead on him. "Back the fuck off!" I started yelling louder. I'm pretty sure in this moment my voice cracked because A, I was scared shitless. No amount of self-defense classes and time at the range prepares you emotionally for this kind of thing. And B, even though I carry, I'm really against violence, and killing someone was really not on my list of things to do for the night. Did I also mention I was really fucking scared? Anyway, in a panic, the fucker threw the pipe at me. It whizzed by. I dived behind my car for cover. By the time I knelt up and looked over the rear of my car, he was already booking it. I heard a car door slam and tires screech. He launched off the curb on the east side of the lot and tore down the road, swaying all over the place. In my own panicked hurry, I pulled the pump out of the car, screwed the cap on tight, and tore out of there myself. Claire was still passed out in my car. Now I was really afraid because I was convinced she'd be drugged, and that was the guy who just did it. Me being more concerned about her earlier and keeping an eye on the road, I must not have noticed him following us. The entire way back to her house, I was wary of any car that was behind me. I was also driving very aggressively. When I finally got to Claire's neighborhood, I circled a separate block that was not hers 4 times, just to make sure that guy wasn't following anymore. When I was satisfied, thinking I wasn't being followed, I pulled up to her house and tried to shake her awake. She was doing that groggy waking up stuff from before, but now she was at least able to get up under her own power. I was able to walk her, thankfully, as I was worried I was going to have to call an ambulance if she wouldn't wake up no matter what. I helped her get her keys from her bag as well. I managed to walk her inside. At this point, she was kind of coming around, asking me what she was going on, where she was. I told her I'd taken her home and helped her lie down. She was completely lost looking. Her eyes just started welling up with tears. She clung to me and started sobbing. She was still very out of it, but I guess she realized something really bad was going on. Thankfully, I was able to get her to lie down and get her to sleep quickly. I wrote a note for her which pretty much said, "Hey, I'll be in the next room. We're gonna go to the hospital in the morning to get you checked out." Fast forward to the morning. She was sick as a dog, and after she expelled some demons from her stomach, I drove her to the hospital where she got tested and treated. I still shudder to think what might have happened had I not had my CCW with me. I do know a very small amount of martial arts, but that's not something you want to take against a crazy person with a pipe. Claire still doesn't remember much from the night, except calling me and sitting next to the doorman. My advice for you guys on this sub, either be with friends you trust when you go out, or be very vigilant when you're by yourself. That night could have ended badly in 1,000 different ways, but thankfully, even luckily, everyone made it out safe and sound. For anyone interested, they did a urine test and found traces of Rohypnol. In the days after, we went to the bar and let them know what happened. I gave as good a description of the guy as I could, but Claire decided against filing a police report, and I respectfully went with her wishes. I was always the weird kid growing up, so making friends was never very easy for me. I was a bit of a punk in high school, so living in a preppy religious town was my idea of hell. Eventually, I met this boy named Sean. I was so happy to finally have someone I connected with. We very quickly became best friends and hung out nearly every day. He was very odd, but so was I, so I was able to look past it. Notably, most of the time when we would hang out, we were also on drugs, so I figured some of the weird stuff he said must have just been the drugs talking. One day, though, he just randomly said, "Hey, I'm gonna stab someone this week." 4 days later, he threatened to shoot up our school on Instagram. He played it off as a joke when I confronted him about it, but when the school confronted him, they took it much more seriously. He was taken into custody by the police, but not charged with anything somehow. His parents also took away his phone and forced him to move away for a few weeks to let the air clear out, but we kept in contact in the meantime. Around this point, my dumb self realized I was in love with him. I did everything I could to clear his name. I even got into arguments with parents on Facebook. My parents begged me to stop talking to him, but for some reason, I truly believed he was good. I didn't want to believe he was really capable of hurting anyone. The whole shooting thing never really blew over, though. When he came back to school, students would run away from him in the hallways. People would send him threats at all times. His reputation was completely ruined. After this, something in him changed. He was a lot angrier. We would be talking and joking around about some random thing when all of a sudden he would just start attacking me with words. I'd tell him about a boy I was talking to and he'd call me a whore. or if I made any new friends, he'd go out of his way to ruin my new friendships. For some reason, he did this in a way that I saw it as him being supportive. About a year went by after this. The verbal abuse continued, and I continued to do nothing about it. I was still in love with him after all, but I didn't act on it since he was my closest friend. And to keep my mind off Sean for a while, I started dating this guy named Alex. Sean hated him, not for any particular reason or anything. He just didn't like that I spent time with someone that was not him. Alex was also a weed dealer, and Sean knew this. Sean asked if Alex would front him some weed since he knew we were best friends, and Alex did so. I don't remember the exact amount, but it was a decent chunk, enough to be mad about if you didn't get paid back for it. Well, of course, Sean never paid him back. Alex tried to talk to him about it, but Sean always put him off and avoided him. After about a month of this, Alex saw Sean's car in a Taco Bell parking lot and pulled up. He saw Sean in his car and began to get out. Since Alex had anger issues, he also pulled his baseball bat along with him. Sean saw him and freaked out. He pulled out of his parking spot quickly, drove off and called 911. Alex was then arrested for assault with a deadly weapon. 3 days later, when Alex got out of jail, he was driving to his friend's house when he saw Sean standing in his front yard. He rolled down his window and called him a pussy, then drove away. Sean called the police again, and Alex was arrested for stalking this time. Around this time, my parents had caught me smoking. I didn't want to lie anymore, so I was honest about everything. Obviously, they were mad at me for getting myself into the situation. I had just told them that I was smoking weed and dating a drug dealer, so I was in a pretty fair amount of trouble. My parents took my phone away as soon as I got home from school. I wasn't allowed to see Alex when he got out of jail, and they took my paychecks as well, so I wouldn't use all my money to buy weed. They also made me download a tracker on my phone so they could make sure I was home when they weren't. They contemplated calling Sean's parents too and telling them we had been smoking together. I knew that if Sean got caught smoking again, he would get kicked out of his house, so I snuck my phone and texted him my parents might call his. He was extremely pissed. He called me all kinds of horrible names and said he wished he had never even met me. I'd finally had enough at that point. I told him not to talk to me ever again. My parents never did end up calling his parents, though. After that, we pretty much didn't talk at all anymore. I asked not to be scheduled with him at work and avoided him at all costs at school. We didn't have any classes together either, so it wasn't too hard. But hearing the stuff he'd started to say about me made me find it a little bit difficult. He had started rumors I was addicted to coke, stuff about me selling nudes. This is when the texts started. He began texting me constantly, so I blocked his number. Then he'd use someone else's phone to text me instead, so I'd block that number as well. Then he'd use WhatsApp or GroupMe since we used those for work, so I blocked him on there too. He eventually got fired from our job because he had been writing tips on receipts if people didn't ask for a copy of their receipt and left the tip line empty. The messages got even more furious for the next few weeks. I just continued to block anyone he was associated with. I didn't want to be in contact with him whatsoever. He kept making these new Instagram accounts to message me on though, but all of his attempts to contact me failed. One day, I had a late lesson at School of Rock where I took guitar lessons. My teacher had stayed late for me, so I was expecting his car to be the only one still in the lot, but it wasn't. There were 2 cars sitting there, my teacher's and Sean's. To this day, I don't even know how he knew I was going to be there. I quickly parked, locked my doors, and thought about what to do. I then realized he was not in his car. I calmed down a bit and called inside to ask if he was there, but he wasn't. I cautiously got out of my car and grabbed my guitar, then walked inside with no problems. After my lesson, though, I came outside to see that he was now parked right next to me, waiting for me to get into my car. When he saw me, he began screaming profanities at me. He just stood there screaming at me. I quickly climbed into my car from the passenger door, so I didn't have to walk next to him. Then I drove home as fast as I could. After that, he began asking people to ask me to talk to him at school. Of course, I didn't. Each time someone mentioned his name to me, it caused me to have a panic attack so bad I'd have to leave school. I ended up missing the entire month of November, then switching to an online school. About a month after I did this, I was driving with a friend to pick up food for my mom. As soon as we pulled into the drive-thru, the car behind me began to flash their brights at me. I looked in my rearview mirror, only to see Sean's car right there. He had this identifying sticker across the top of his windshield, so I knew it was him right away. I looked over at my friend in fear. I didn't want to scare you, so I didn't say anything, but he's been following us since we left Target. I panicked and just pretended not to notice him. He then pulled out of the drive-thru and parked right next to it by the exit. As soon as I pulled out, so did he. I sped to my friend's house, dropped her off, and went straight home. At this point, my parents thought going to the police with everything would be the smartest thing to do. An officer came over to my house and took a statement. I showed him screenshots of every message he'd sent over the past months, and my friend that was in the car with me in the drive-thru talked to the police officer as well. We decided not to press charges, but we did decide to file an incident report. Days went by and I didn't hear anything else from him. I thought maybe it was over and I could finally move on with my life, but my dad told me Sean had messaged him on Facebook. He was saying all sorts of things like I was addicted to pills and that I'd even stolen money from my dad to buy more. I've never done pills in my life. I'm a hippie, so I stick to natural drugs. My parents know this, so they screenshotted the messages and sent them to the police as well. The police stopped by his house to tell him to stop contacting me. I continued to get messages from random Instagram accounts, and sometimes I'd see his car behind me random places. Each time I'd write down the location, date, and time I saw him. At this point, I started to work with Alex's lawyers to prove Sean wasn't this innocent victim he was pretending to be. Eventually, Alex's charges were dropped as well. Sean had been proven unreliable when I came forward with my story. I wish I could say I had an ending to all this, but I don't. I still get random messages from him, but I don't bother to screenshot them anymore. Since I switched to online school, I was able to graduate a year early. Because of that, I moved away for college, so I don't worry about him following me everywhere anymore. Last I heard about him was that he got arrested just a few months ago. My apartment complex is in a safe neighborhood with well-manicured grounds and awesome amenities. My family and I had comfortably lived in our second-floor apartment for about 2 years before Shrek moved into the unit above us. We exchanged friendly hellos and awkward smiles in the stairwell, but beyond that, we never formally introduced ourselves, and we never even knew his real name. Because he was large, had very messy hair, and had a certain charming goofiness about him, we secretly nicknamed him Shrek. Well, 6 months after he moved in, we heard shouting and banging in Shrek's apartment. The fight wasn't extreme enough to call 911, but someone had clearly upset him because he was shouting profanities and slamming things loudly enough to be heard outside. Funnily enough, we never heard the shouts of a second voice. We only heard his screams. The fights would dissipate rather abruptly, and we never really gave them a second thought. As winter turned into spring, I found myself spending more and more time out on my balcony. One evening, I was sitting outside having a phone conversation. Amidst the chit-chat and giggles, I suddenly got this odd feeling, like I was being watched. I turned around and realized that Shrek was standing very close to our building at ground level, which put his head just below my balcony. Our eyes met after I looked down at him, and I offered a half smile and waved hello. I didn't feel scared or anything, but it definitely felt a bit weird. He asked if I could let him borrow a cigarette. I said sure and threw one down to him. After he walked away, I lowered my voice and laughingly told my friend that Shrek had startled me. In the days and weeks that followed, I would find Shrek lurking under my balcony more and more often. One evening at twilight, I was sitting at the patio table talking with my friend once more when I got that feeling I was being watched again. I looked around, but this time I couldn't see anything, so I went about with my conversation as usual. After a few minutes of being unable to shake that feeling though, suddenly my gaze caught something in the shadows that I had previously missed. Shrek was standing in a darkened corner just under my balcony, staring up at me. That was the first time he genuinely creeped me out. He didn't say a single word. He just stood there in the shadows and stared. The exchanges between myself and him began to happen more often as well. I'd catch him staring at me. He'd ask for a cigarette or ask me if I needed some company. I tried to be friendly and cordial, but to be honest, he annoyed me more than he scared me at this point. He seemed like a big lug who kinda lacked some basic social skills. Over the summer, though, the fights between him and his mysterious visitor became more frequent and more violent as well. We'd often hear him shouting and banging around, but we never saw anyone else. One day in October, I passed him in the stairwell. The whole right side of his face was just a mess. Black eyes, swollen cheek, dark purple bruising. I wondered what had happened to him, but didn't dare stop to make small talk. I figured he'd had another one of those fights with his girl or boyfriend. Actually, after seeing this, I kind of felt bad for him. By November, the weather was getting quite chilly, and I had completely quit smoking by then, so I was spending less time on my balcony. This meant I didn't encounter Shrek as often as before. One evening in early December, I was laying on my bed watching some TV when I heard his voice screaming so loud I thought he was standing in my living room. I could hear loud booming thuds and huge fuck yous just outside my front door and into the stairwell as well. This time, it sounded like a really serious fight. I remembered seeing his face several weeks earlier, and now I was concerned for his safety. I called 911 and asked that someone do a wellness check for my neighbor. I explained that I was safe, but I also wanted to make sure he was alright too. I told the dispatcher I couldn't hear a second voice, but he was clearly fighting with someone. Nothing ever came of that incident though, and by the new year I'd completely forgotten the whole thing. Early, about 4:50 one March morning, my family and I were suddenly awoken to a very loud boom. It felt like a truck had just hit our building. The walls, the bed, even the floor shook. Within a few seconds of that, even more booms. After fully awakening, I realized the sounds were coming from Shrek's apartment. Our 3 children, 18, 16, and 14, were now awake as well, trying to make sense of what was going on. More banging, and what sounded like a terrible struggle was going on just above our heads. We could hear him shouting, "Fuck you! Shut the fuck up!" I truly thought someone just above us was in a struggle for their life right now. My husband called 911, and dispatch said they would have someone over immediately. We waited. The noises intensified. We could hear screams and shouts and bangings and thuds, as though a body was being slammed against walls and furniture. Then, the shower water turned on, and very loud bass death metal began to blast. An eternity seemed to pass by, but in reality it must have been about 10 minutes. The police had still not arrived yet. We kept looking out the window for signs of them, but all we could see were 2 police vehicles positioned on opposite ends of the lot. My family was terrified. Only one single door stood between us and whatever chaos was going on right above us. In that moment, I texted my friend and told her I thought he was murdering someone, or perhaps being murdered himself, because I truly thought that was what we were hearing. The noises got very loud, and while I knew there was no actual explosion, the level of sound was nearly comparable to that of a small one. I called 911 again, and the operator said help was on the way. So again, we waited. About 2 to 3 minutes later, we hear these loud footsteps storm into our building. We hear the police officers introducing themselves and banging on his door. Then we hear a gunshot. My husband and I hauled our kids into our bedroom at the back of the apartment. We had them huddle low to our bed and lock our bedroom door. I got a call from the operator. She warned me to remain indoors under all circumstances and stay away from the front door. We could hear all sorts of commotion coming from just above us. Then things got real quiet. My husband called me over to the window, where I saw the officers taking Shrek away in cuffs. By now, the entire lot was filled with flashing blue and red lights from both emergency vehicles and news vans. A few moments later, 2 officers knocked on our door. They interviewed each of us extensively and spoke to each of our children one at a time. About half an hour later, 3 plainclothes detectives returned and took turns collecting a statement from each of us. It was now 9 a.m. The sun was out, and we could see crime scene tape all around our building. Police, detectives, news vans, they were all outside and we were exhausted. In the days that followed, we finally learned his real name. We learned that he had answered the door clutching a sword, which is what prompted the officer to fire a shot. Thankfully, he wasn't hit and no one else was in the apartment either. Shrek admitted to the police that he was using the noise as a tactic to get us to go upstairs. His intention was to provoke us enough to force a confrontation because he wanted to kill us all with his sword. His account of the night was very cloudy and confused. He said he had instigated this confrontation at midnight. In reality, at midnight all was calm and quiet. The ordeal didn't even begin until almost 5 a.m. Police reports also indicated that during interrogation, he appeared to carry conversations and argue with people that were not there. Reading those words in the newspaper triggered something in my mind. All those times we'd heard him fighting and screaming at someone, he was all alone. The realization as to the depth of his mental illness and anger issues were chilling. Shrek was jailed and evicted from our complex. Life has since returned to normal in our quiet little neighborhood. We've heard no other reports as to whether he's free or behind bars. Wherever he is, though, I certainly hope he's getting the help that he needs.